Howdy folks, welcome to Bikes, Burgers, Beers. Today I'm joining Ross at Biker Talk and we're comparing the Meteor 350 versus the classic 350 Reinvisioned. Stick around if you want to know more. Alrighty, so initially I jumped onto the Meteor 350 and Ross was sort of following behind me on the classic 350 and we were heading towards the petrol station to start with just to fill up the tanks and make sure we were ready to go for our little journey. The thing I found immediately when I jumped on the Meteor 350 was how comfortable that seat was. If you were ever going to travel on a motorcycle with a comfortable seat from the factory, this is the bike to do it on. Jumping onto these two bikes, I found my biggest initial concern was that I was not going to feel comfortable riding a 350cc motorcycle. You see, the thing was that I haven't ridden anything this small since I was getting my learners and on my provisional license, so I was a bit concerned about the power. Now, I'm not unfamiliar to low-powered motorcycles. I own the Himalayan, which is 411cc's, but even on paper, it still produces more power at the rear wheel. I was also a little bit concerned because they're such small motorcycles and we were riding sort of in the afternoon when peak hour starts to creep in onto the Sydney roads. However, I really didn't have anything to worry about. Both bikes have acceptable power for commuting and riding around in most suburban areas. It's really on the highway that they're lacking, but it's not impossible. You can hit the national speed limit and maintain it. So here's the moment where I've jumped onto the classic 350 and we've hit this 100 zone right here. It's really going to test out the motorcycle and see if it's capable of riding it at highway speeds. Now, there's a slight incline to this hill which you may or may not be able to see in the camera. However, the bike did struggle to get past 90 kilometers an hour. I will say though, in its favour, the engine only had about 1100 kilometers on the clock, so it's still quite tight. While we're talking about performance, the biggest thing I found is getting back onto the Meteor later on. I found that the engine on the Meteor 350, which had about 3,500 Ks on it, performed significantly better. And Ross and I both agreed to that. Having ridden the bikes back to back, we realised that the Meteor 350 had a better performing engine. That really surprised us because both bikes have the same engine. And another thing that surprised us is handling, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Now, on inspection, the bike has the same suspension, the same geometry, and the same frame. What we found though, both Ross and I agreed, is the classic 350 seemed to have a slightly more sportier advantage to it. And I think, and Ross agrees, we have a forward stance on the classic 350, whereas on the Meteor 350 you're kind of sitting back in that cruiser style position. And what that does is, I believe, changes the center of gravity of the bike. Otherwise, they both handled exceptionally well. What I'm going to do right now though is leave you with a moment to listen to the exhaust note of the classic 350. I believe Royal Enfield has somehow still maintained that bullet thump. Have a listen. So jumping back onto the Meteor 350 here, I immediately noticed that the bike had more power and more willingness to get up these hills. I was able to keep up with Ross quite easily, and in fact later on Ross and I spoke and he was pinning the throttle absolutely wide open. The other thing I noticed in addition to the extra power was that the classic 350 and Meteor 350 really have different rider triangles. You seem to be a little bit more forward on the classic 350, whereas the Meteor 350 is more of a cruiser style bike. Your legs are more forward, your back is further back, and your arms feel kind of in a neutral position, whereas the classic 350 has a little bit of that cafe racer style thing going on where you're leaning forward and there's a little bit more weight on your wrists and your feet are actually tucked in further underneath your buttocks. That was something that really was made evident, especially in regards to handling. And here you can really hear that bullet thump in front of me. Both motorcycles have adequate braking for their weight and their performance. Remember folks, these aren't Gixxers. So when we had to hit the brakes, they were concise, they were progressive, they didn't have a lot of feel, but they did have enough bite to pull you up and pull you over. So no dramas there at all. These aren't race bikes. You know, looks can be very subjective. Some people find the look of the Meteor 350 absolutely amazing. I recently did a poll on Instagram showing the two. I ran a poll on Instagram and the popular choice was the Classic 350 every time. Here we can see the two seats, the Meteor 350 and the Classic 350. It got a better vote, the Classic 350 won. Here we can see the tank badges, the Classic 350 had a more popular choice. The Meteor 350 looks good, but the Classic was just better. And finally, the instrument clusters. The Meteor 350 cluster looks modern, clean, nice. The Classic 350, well, it's classic and timeless, and there's something more attractive about it. The reality is, while riding both motorcycles, back to back, I found that I was more familiar, more happy, and having more fun on the Classic 350, despite the fact that it felt slower and the handling was different. Would I take either one on a long trip? Well, the Classic 350 is a great runabout for town. The Meteor 350 on the other hand is a bike that I would take on a long trip. 300-400 k's away, a nice little weekend away. Enough power to sit you on the highway comfortably and get you up the hills, and enough comfort to keep you going on those long distances without having to stop every hour and stretch. You see, at the end of the day, despite the fact that both bikes have the same engine, the same frame, and even the same suspension for that matter, the reality is that both bikes are very different and they're suited to different riding styles and different needs. It really comes down to what makes you feel happy riding these two motorcycles. They're not going to set the world on fire when it comes to performance, so you've got to look at other aspects of the bike. How comfortable they feel, how happy they make you feel. And that's the thing about these Royal Enfield motorcycles. They're cheap and cheerful, and that's why I love mine. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Bikes, Burgers, Beers. Remember folks, keep it twisted.